Good morning, everybody. We are here for the Astro-Babble and only going live on Facebook today because Instagram launched a new update, which I figured out how to go live uh, on Wednesday, but for some reason cannot go live on today. So they're gonna have to watch the YouTube replay for that. Unfortunately, technology is still a mystery even to me. But we are here to analyze 5 new charts. We are here to talk about the stars. We are here to talk about the houses, the planets, the signs, and how the combination of all those things makes up a natal chart and what we can figure out from that natal chart. If you would like to be on the list for the live streams and you would like your chart featured, feel free to private message me your birth date, birthplace, and exact birth time. I'll add you to the list. The list is rather long. Please be patient, but I will message you when your chart is featured. If you would like to schedule a private consult and go one-on-one, you can always fill out a consultation request at scorpiorisingastrology.com, where I also have online classes that you can learn astrology from me as well. So let's go ahead. We will move on to our first chart of the morning. And our first chart is going to be Cat. Hello, Cat. Cheers. Let's see. Nice Scorpio rising. Stationed Mars as ruler in the 11th. Some interesting sibling stuff. Hmm. Okay. So, first and foremost, with Scorpio rising on the ascendant, we have the sensitivity factor kind of turned up. Scorpio is the hypersensitive sign. It is defensive and protective of itself. Think of scorpion in its shell because of that. Scorpio on the ascendant does bless you with things like the piercing gaze, the ability to kind of look through other people's defenses, but it also does give you a little bit of a disadvantage as well, especially because your moon is in Capricorn, where emotional intelligence can sometimes be a little bit lacking. You know, Scorpio is a water sign, which naturally makes it at home in the emotional space. But the problem is with Scorpio is that they tend to be so sensitive of their surroundings that they forget what they're feeling. And in your case specifically, with this Capricorn moon in the third as well, there's a good chance that emotional repression is part of the makeup of the chart. Now, one thing that we also need to understand with Neptune and Scorpio in the first house is that there is a chemical sensitivity in the chart. That's a little bit more of the medical astrology side, which I specialize in as well. Neptune tends to make things confusing. Scorpio ruling the bladder, the sinus, the colon, as well as the reproductive areas. But also the combination of Neptune and Scorpio tends to be confusing secrets. And to put that in the body, one of the things that I notice time and time again with clients who have this formation is that they just tend to be super sensitive to things like medications, things like alcohol, things like caffeine. You know, any sort of substance that would affect the body, either ramp it up or shut it down. This particular body, this particular chart has that sensitivity kind of turned up to 11 physically. The ruler of the chart is Mars in Virgo stationed. Not necessarily an ideal placement, but Mars in Virgo is a very productive placement. And placed in the 11th house of friendships, tribes, communities, it really does give you a little bit more of an advantage with friendship specifically. Although we also have Pluto retrograde and Uranus retrograde here as well, which makes some of those friendships a little bit difficult. You know, one of the things that you'll be able to bond over is hard work. Virgo is a very hard-working sign, and Mars is originally a harvest deity. And so when I see Mars in Virgo, I always think of that kind of farmer archetype being in the 11th house, kind of that group farming mentality. Many hands make for light work. That's a good kind of summary of that space. We do have the sun in Aquarius in the 4th, and this is an interesting dynamic paired with the stuff that we talked about with the 3rd with some sibling nonsense. Because putting the sun, the sense of ego, the sense of self, external self, really, ascendant is more internal self, but ego with the sun is more external self. The sun in Aquarius in the fourth house of family does bring us this feeling of being the black sheep. Aquarius is the rebel. Aquarius is the sign that is on the outskirts, kind of locked up in its ivory tower, trying to find the cure for cancer. And to have that in the family dynamic, it's almost as if you identify with being that black sheep, and that can be an interesting kind of dynamic for you to play with. But also, the home is a place for you to retreat into. It's a home that is exclusive. Aquarius does rule that exclusivity. They're not necessarily a team player, Aquarius. Aquarius does like to kind of be in their head and on their own. And for you to place all of that in the fourth house of family, it doesn't necessarily jive with the traditional family dynamic, but it can still make for some interesting experiences. The Venus-Mercury conjunction, both in Capricorn in the third house of writing, excuse me, writing, teaching, communication. There is an interesting dynamic here with the idea of you having Mercury, the planet of the mind, in Capricorn, who's very focused and business-oriented. In the third house of writing, teaching, communication, it wouldn't surprise me if you did get into the teaching fields, if you did use your writing or your creative efforts with words to really bring forward some of these properties, especially because Mercury is ruling the North Node in Gemini in the 8th house of business, as well as taxes, estates, death, all those things. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you were a freelance writer, or were kind of like an independent contractor teacher, or a specialist teacher where they brought you in specifically to teach these things. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? I want to talk about relationships. One of the things about this Jupiter and Taurus in the 7th house, Jupiter is the planet of expansion, and Taurus is naturally that sign of the bull. So we have this gigantic bull archetype in your 7th house, which can make your spouse rather stubborn. And when I say rather stubborn, like super stubborn. But also, they're the most kind-hearted person you'd ever meet. It's a very Ferdinand archetype, Ferdinand the Bull. If you haven't seen that movie, that cartoon, I highly recommend that for understanding what you're attracted to in a spouse. There is that lovey-dovey side of Taurus where they really just want to kind of cuddle up on the couch and just be surrounded by the people, places, things that make them feel comfortable. But then also, when we look at Jupiter, Jupiter is the planet of expansion. Jupiter doesn't do things small. Jupiter only does things big. And so when I've seen Jupiter and Taurus in the 7th, this can also be medically spouses that struggle with metabolism issues. Let's see. Because Mars is ruling the 6th house of work from the 11th house, I would also suggest that you really involve yourself with community efforts, and finding yourself surrounded by large groups of people that will not only help to stimulate your work dynamic and your sense of self-confidence and self-esteem, but it'll just be overall good for you. Let's see. And then that Jupiter ruling the 2nd house of finance, there's, a good tie between the financial house and the relationship house. But the chart keeps running cold for me. It's not gripping me as much. So I think we're going to have to leave it there, Kat. I think we're going to have to leave it there. Because it's going completely gray. Yeah. Okie dokie, my dear. Thank you so much for donating your chart. I very, very much appreciate it. Let's take a quick peek. We're not looking at any comments so far. We're moving on to chart number 2. Chart number 2 is going to be Yvonne. Good morning, Yvonne. Let's see, Sagittarius ascendant. Ooh, Yvonne, you are getting financially hit right now with all these transits. Not cool. Not cool. Yeah, Jupiter return is just bringing all of the financial nonsense to the surface. You're really here to master finances, but it's times like these over the past year and a half with all of these Capricorn transits that have really just blow after blow after blow just continued to drain your financial resources. Now, all of this will shift December 19th when we have the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction in Aquarius that will also light up your third house of writing, teaching, communication, where you find so much freedom because your sun is in Aquarius. But just as an FYI, the struggles that you're experiencing now from a monetary perspective, like it's written. It's not something that you did wrong. It's not something, we all have choice as well. So it's not that. If you pinched your pennies, if you got really frugal, if you listened to those messages, if you played that game really safe, really conservative, then you should be in not the best spot, but surviving. Yeah, that's what this period is really asking us to do in general. And we've only got a couple more months of it. So if you can just stick it out for a couple more months, finances will start to turn around greatly. Greatly. And let me say this. Just because you are used to financial scarcity, just because you are used to monetary unavailability, just because you are used to poverty, does not mean that that is what you deserve. FYI. Just FYI. We do have a lovely moon in Cancer that's happening in the chart. I very, very much enjoy that in the 8th house of death, taxes, estates, business, other people's money. One of the things that I think is important to understand about the dynamics of your chart is you're really good at investment and understanding emotionally like what makes a good investment. But at the same time, personal finance is the hard spot. But having a moon in Cancer in the 8th, it really does bring a little bit of alleviation into the 8th house of business and estates. But we do also have Mars retrograde in Cancer here, which makes it a stop go energy. Mars is all about moving forward, and Cancer is about taking time and enjoying and smelling the roses and taking care of others and being compassionate. And Mars doesn't really do compassion. So there may be some conflict here about constantly wanting to start a business, but it's never the right time. That's just conflict that's kind of baked into your chart. Also, Moon in Cancer in the 8th does bring forward some pretty scary intuitive abilities. Scary, not horror scary, although the 8th house is the 8th house of death, so mediumship is going to be one of the psychic abilities that I would encourage you to develop. The whole talking with dead people thing, always a great trick at parties, but also very, very powerful skill. But to have the Moon in Cancer in the 8th really does require you to understand the emotional investment that translates over time through memory, whether that's assessing physical things like money, like homes, like investments, or whether that's assessing the memories or the experiences of somebody's life who's either physically here or not physically here. The easiest part of your chart is going to be this exalted Venus and Pisces in the 4th house of family. I love this. I absolutely love this. She's also ruling your 6th house of work, so work will always be a great place for you to kind of throw yourself into. She's also ruling your 11th house of friendships, friendships being very, very strong for you, friendships really being a nice relief, a nice reprieve. You've chosen, you naturally attract a very well-to-do friendship circle, constantly inviting them over to your home. But having Venus and Pisces overall is a beautiful placement, and to have that in your home, you have a very beautiful home, and in fact, it wouldn't surprise me if you worked in real estate, because the 4th house is connected to the 6th house of work, or worked in the family business, because the 4th house is also the 4th house of family. But the idea of your home, your family life being connected to your work environment in some way, and also an exalted Venus, like there is some really strong beauty. There is some really strong, like you'd be excellent at feng shui, you know. Just lots of really good things with that Venus placement. I adore that Venus placement for sure. Sun in Aquarius and Mercury in Aquarius, both in the third house of writing, teaching, communication, really does make you have a way with words. It does make you a little bit quirky. You know, Aquarius is the quirky sign. To have the mind in Aquarius, you know, it brings that kind of Albert Einstein energy to the mind, always on the cusp, always learning new things, always striving towards new intellectual heights. But whether the mortals can keep up with you is another story. The sun, though, here in Aquarius does bring forward the third house pretty strongly. You've stamped yourself as the writer or the teacher, you know, somebody who is a storyteller in your community, somebody who really activates the written and the spoken word very, very nicely. And it wouldn't. It's a good skill for you to have, especially if you were to kind of go into entrepreneurship or work with kind of marketing. The whole concept of you using your words and having that silver tongue is a quite a beautiful thing. You know, you'll be, as far as spouse is concerned, as far as intimate relationships is concerned, this Mercury in the third is ruling your seventh house of relationships. So you falling in love with somebody who's in the writing, the teaching, the speaking professions, but also you falling in love with your neighbor, you falling in love with somebody who's local, you falling in love with somebody that you see every single day. The third house is the house of routine. It's the house of neighborhoods as well. So when we look at that being connected to the seventh house, if you really want to look at a dating pool, like go to a block party, go to a community fundraising event, sit on your local neighborhood association, and you'll have more chances to tap into that that seventh house of relationships. You know, one of the things that I think from an intellectual perspective, from a mental perspective, you're going to have to realize is your type of intelligence where you just grab things and you just retain things, but specific things that are useful, is not necessarily conducive to what we hold as the standard of education. Yeah. So this is where I look at like street smarts versus book smarts. You know, memorizing facts and performing on a scholastic level is not necessarily the easiest part of your chart. Instead, we find the writing, teaching, speaking, the inspiration that comes from within, the intelligence that is natural, being stamped on the chart as being the real power. Yeah. So as long as you can master your finances, lean into your workspace, you're blessed in that space, and continue to kind of emotionally invest yourself in your intuitive abilities and also work with your writing skills, I think that really brings us into a good summary of the chart. Awesome. Thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate it. I appreciate you watching and tuning in and looking at your chart. So glad you enjoyed it, Kat. Let's go ahead. We will move on to chart number 3. And I'm so sorry, my dear, if I butcher your name. Jage, like sage with a J. Let's take a peek at this chart and we will see what we see. Ooh, fun. Okay, my dear. So we have a north node in Capricorn and an ascendant in Capricorn, which makes you a pretty heavy Capricorn. And although your sun is in Cancer, you know, we'll get to that in a second. That's your soft side, but we're talking about your hard side first. Having a Capricorn ruled chart, especially in early life, made you that very rebellious, very hard-headed, very sour kind of teen. Strong Capricorn placements in the chart, especially earlier in life when they're not mature, they tend to be very hard to handle. Um, and especially with the North Node here, like your whole purpose this go around in this life is to develop a strong sense of identity and to master the physical world and to master your own sense of self. And the only way you can really do that is being like super firm in your convictions. And that sometimes requires pissing off other people and saying like, no, I don't think the way you think, or no, that doesn't match with what I believe, or no, I don't want to do that. You know, Capricorn, especially when it's at its most powerful, it really has mastered the word no. Um, and that's a beautiful thing. But we also have conditions that are placed in your chart that need to be kind of unpacked as well. So Saturn is the ruler of your chart, and Saturn is in Gemini in the 6th house of work, health, and pets. So this immediately starts to raise some red flags for me because the ruler of your chart is in a health house. That could mean that you're naturally drawn to the healing professions. It could be that you're actually very good with animals, but then also from a work perspective, it does make you a little bit of a workaholic. Saturn and Capricorn are naturally going to be very work-oriented signs. Excuse me. Very work-oriented signs. They're very much about proving their work through actions, their worth through actions over time, right? And to have Saturn in the 6th house of work, it does mean that you're in that space of proving yourself a little bit too hard. And we might need to kind of reel you back a little bit from that need. But it's really what was imprinted on you when you were young. And the reason why I say that is because down here in the 4th house of family, we have two very competitive placements. We have Mars in Aries, and we have the moon in Aries. Those two formations are not easy to escape. And it also brings a very fiery, very competitive, very aggressive slant to the family life, and especially the early years of upbringing, which caused you to harden, which caused you to develop that thick exterior shell, frankly, to protect your poor, squishy little Cancer sun over in the 7th. Like, you know, at the end of the day, you've decided to be associated with the archetype of the mother. Like, you've put your sun, your planet of ego, your planet of selfhood in the 7th house of relationships in Cancer. Like, you identify with being, you know, the one who cooks and cleans and takes care of everybody when they're sick, and you showing your love through the ability to nurture is such an ingrained part of you. But that doesn't sit well in a Mars and Aries household. No, 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 not with the literal planet of war in the sign of Aries, that cardinal fire. Like, girl, you had to run and hide from that really aggressive temperamental energy. That's crazy. If you're still struggling to process that, we may need to discuss some remediation. Because really all Mars and Aries wants to do is conquer and succeed. Yeah, it wants to prove its worth through action. And really that's not so different from your Capricorn side. The difference, though, with your Capricorn side is that Capricorn respects the idea of time. Capricorn respects the idea that not everything needs to be done at once, and your family did not understand that. Your family was all like, no, let's do it. Let's do it now, and let's do it post-haste, like you're too slow. And these Capricorn placements and these Cancer placements are really conflicted with that level of aggression. And so balancing your Capricorn, your Cancer, and your upbringing with Aries, and frankly your moon in Aries, kind of the emotional impact of what that taught you in terms of immediate gratification emotionally, which is not always readily available, right? So We need to balance all of these forces, all of these cardinal signs kind of pulling you in different directions. But ultimately, remember that you're here to develop a sense of self, and you can't really develop a sense of self without a certain amount of friction. Respect your soft side, but also respect and honor your upbringing, because the more you work your way through life, the more you'll start to understand and appreciate those lessons. Earning money will never really be an issue because Saturn in Gemini of work, ruling the second house of finance, that's fine. We also have some stronger entrepreneurial tendencies in the chart, with Uranus and Pluto in the 10th house being ruled by Venus and Leo in the 8th of business, taxes, estates, and death. You know, Pluto and Uranus both being outer planets, Pluto specifically maturing at age 50, fame coming later in life due to kind of chronic achievement would be a good way to say it. So just bide your time until then you'll actually be recognized for what you're good at. I never really like to see Venus in the 8th ruling the 5th, because at its worst, traditionally, we would look at that as potentially the death of children, or children with some sort of medical issues that don't necessarily make it as easy to thrive, because the 5th house of children is ruled by a planet in the 8th house of death and taxes and estates, which can make it a little bit more complicated from that perspective. But that same placement on a positive spin is also what gives creative entrepreneurship energy, because the 8th house is the 8th house of business, and the 5th house is the 5th house of creativity. So creativity in business, like that's kind of the art of interpretation of all these placements, is they can mean so many different things. It just depends on how you choose to express the energy. Do you choose to harness it from a lower octave or a higher octave? Do you push against it and fight it every step of the way? Or do you lean into it and do you allow it to guide you? I think that's it. I think that's all the chart has to say. Cool. Thank you, my dear. I very much appreciate you donating your charts to the live streams. Oh, I did get the name right. Yay! Fun. Yeah, totally late bloomer with that. Okay. Moving to Deidre. Let's take a peek. Ooh, Super Scorpio. Super Scorpio. Oh, and we have the same thing. We have the Mars and Aries in the 6th. Workaholic tendencies. There you go. But the water energy is super high in this chart, which I like. I like it a lot. Oh, that moon at 29 degrees. Really? Really? Well, you're here to emotionally mature, so I can't fault you for that. But whether or not you actually learn... Interesting. Interesting. Okay, my dear. So, first and foremost, we have a lot of Scorpio energy in the first house. We have Pluto in Scorpio, Ascendant in Scorpio, South Node Scorpio, Saturn Scorpio. So we need to understand what it means to be a Scorpio and how that relates to the other placements in your chart. Yes, you have a Pisces sun. Whatever. We'll get to that. But in my opinion and in my practice, the Ascendant is more powerful of a formative aspect than the sun, because it makes up the core personality, the personality that a lot of people tend to repress. So for you, understanding what it means to be a Scorpio means you recognizing where you get that kind of underworld streak, where you get that fascination for the occult, where you are constantly walking into a room and the first thought is, what are people hiding? Or what is hidden, you being fascinated by things that are wrapped in shadow or the underbelly of society. You know, It also makes people very uncomfortable in your presence when they do have something to hide. You naturally start to expose that in them. Anybody who has Scorpio on the ascendant makes an excellent detective, really is able to smell and root out the deepest of held secrets. But it does also come with a strong sense of hypersensitivity that needs to be protected and guarded at all costs. You know, being a water sign on the ascendant and a double water sign, really, because your sun is in Pisces, you know, this is something where we need to understand emotional intelligence will be very, very important throughout your life. If you do not study the way emotions work, if you do not study a certain level of psychology, this chart, it can be difficult to balance, because water flows and it picks up and conforms to whatever is around it. And because of that, the over empathy, yeah, especially with Pisces. I just did a video on Pisces, which I think you should watch. But Pisces and Scorpio both being hypersensitive, you know, I think it's neat. Somebody needs to tell you that boundaries and internal mental emotional work will be a requirement for your life if you did not already know that. Okay. Having Mercury in Pisces in the 5th house as well as the sun in the 5th house, you know, it does bring a very childlike flair to the chart. It also endears you to children, which I think is fun. But also we need to remember that the 5th house is the house of creativity. So it does really bring forward a lot of creativity in the chart. It really does bring forward a lot of very nice, watery, intuitive creativity specifically. I like it a lot. But then there's this other side of you. You have all of this water in the chart. And then the ruler of your chart is also Mars in Aries, super fiery, with Venus and Aries conjoining in the 6th house of work. Now, Venus actually hates to be in Aries. It's one of her least favorite signs to be in, one of her top 3 least favorite signs, because it naturally opposes her rulership of Libra. When we look at this, you know, health is going to be something that should be focused on. Yeah, especially because Venus is goddess of healing. When she's not happy, right, that can be somewhat of a problem. So we especially need to pay attention to the muscles, the head, and the blood. If you start to get anemic, if you start to develop muscle cramps or spasms, and or if you start to sustain any kind of head injuries, that is going to be a side effect that your body is medically out of balance. But then also, you know, Venus and the moon, your 2 feminine planets, your 2 planets that are yin, your 2 planets that would allow you to cultivate aspects of rest and chill and healing to a certain degree, and just repair through meditation and stillness, right? You've put them both in fire signs. You've put your moon in Leo and your Venus in Aries. And that's tricky. You have water to balance it out. So you have the yin, right? But still, you know, putting your emotional planet in the sign of Leo, which is very flamboyant and all dramatic, and then Venus, goddess of unconditional love, in the very hyper-focused, competitive sign of Aries, we might need to work on those a little bit, especially if you find yourself developing workaholic tendencies, especially if you start to chase success. Yeah. Because with the ruler of your chart in the 6th house of work and your moon and Leo in the 10th house, although be it on the 10th house cusp, like right on the edge at 29 degrees, still this can bring forward a slighted idea of what it means to be accomplished in your life. And that idea of overworking can really take over your life in a bad way and potentially shut down all of your creative juices, which I think are so powerful in this chart, really. The North Node in Taurus in the 7th is an interesting choice as well, because it means that you're here to learn how to develop partnership and relationship. But the planet that's ruling that North Node in the 7th is your detrimented Venus in Aries. And I think you cultivating a partnership with somebody that you can work with is going to be important. But remember that if your goal is to find a partner that you can work with, that's also you turning work into another driving factor of your life. Your relationship can't just be a relationship. It has to be a working relationship as well. Again, work, work, work. There's all of this fiery drive to succeed and achieve. And I'm not necessarily a super fan of seeing that pattern over and over and over. Yes, it helps to counterbalance your wishy-washy emotional side. I get it. I get it. But does everything need to be about achievement? Does everything need to be conditional on whether or not you feel like you're reaching for the gold and you're beating your own goals? Yeah. Does your partner really need to perform at the same level? One of the cruxes that I see a lot with Venus and Aries in any connection to the 7th house is this idea of your love language being prove it to me. You know, if you love me, grow. If you love me, do. If you love me, earn more. If you love me, show how you're performing. Show how you're becoming a better person. Show how you're growing. And that can be a tricky strain to put on your relationship when you're also trying to counterbalance that idea in your own head, because your ability to be alive as a human and to contribute to society does not depend on your level of productivity, right? Let me say that a different way. You do not need to be a productive member of society to be valuable as a person, just fundamentally, right? So that's something that I think your chart really needs to ponder, is you have all these intuitive gifts, you have all this creativity, you have all this really strong perception in your chart, but then you're also obsessed with proving yourself. And that can be a toxic spiral. So just as an FYI, that's kind of where I'd like you to focus. Thank you, my dear, for letting me delve into your chart and pick on you just a little bit. Okay, our last chart of the day is going to be Colleen. Cheers, Colleen, how are you? A third Mars and Aries? Are you joking me? God, I can't plan this, you guys. I just can't plan this. It just happens. These charts are randomly submitted, and yet there's always synchronicity every single time. And the moon is in Leo in this chart, just like it was in the last one. I can't even. I can't even. Oh. Oh. Okay. So we have an ascendant in Libra right off the bat. I love a good Libra ascendant because it really sugarcoats the chart. It brings an exterior sense of beauty. It makes you very personable. It graces you with kind of the honey of Venus on your outer persona. You've placed the ruler of your chart, which is Venus in Sagittarius, in your third house of writing, teaching, communication. And you've put it in a trine to your moon in Leo in the 11th. So you being a motivational speaker, you specifically writing for the masses, you using your third house gifts of writing, teaching, and communication, and connecting that to the 11th house of tribes, of communities, of social media. You'd be an excellent influencer. Just because of those placements. Yeah, that's a really strong trine. I love that trine. I think that's absolutely beautiful. Oh, damn. Really? Just a couple degrees away from a grand trine with that Mars and Aries too. Wow. Wow. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to see. Okay, and then we have this the Sun in Capricorn, Mercury Capricorn, Neptune Capricorn in the fourth house of family, opposing the MC in Cancer in the 10th. You know, one of the things that you're just so dead set on is making your house a place of rules, a place of groundedness, a place that can foster success. You're just absolutely obsessed, potentially too obsessed, because Mercury in Capricorn does bring a rigidness to the mind, does bring a mind that's semi-unflexible. Yeah. And to put that in the fourth house, you know, you inherited some of those qualities from your parents. Um, the way that their mind works, the way that your mind now works. Um, just remember that you don't always need to be right. And when you think you're right, remember that there are always many different versions of the truth, especially when it comes to family, especially when it comes to the rules of your own house. Just as an FYI. I really do like your third house of writing, teaching, communication, because it's also ruled by Jupiter in Pisces, who is the luckiest planet of our planetary scheme in his home sign of Pisces in the sixth house of work health. Excuse me. In the sixth house of work, health, and pets. I love that. I love that rulership. Because that again brings just the bounty of Jupiter into that third house of writing, teaching, communication. And if you're not already doing that, I would highly recommend that you do, because you're just so good at it. So good at it. Anytime that you pick up a pen, anytime that you open your mouth, like anytime that you speak with the intent of wooing, you've just got this honey that drips from your lips. It's just fabulous. All of the good astrological stuff in your chart is piled up into those houses, really. Now, similar to some of the other charts, you have North Node in Aries in the seventh house, which means that one of your big lessons here is to actually learn how to be in partnership with others. And I think what's important for you to understand about this, also because you have Mars and Aries here in the seventh, is that the types of relationships that you're attracted to are naturally going to be very competitive and aggressive. That's the type of person, the high-performing individual, the slightly reckless and impulsive, but fun and charismatic and humorous individual that you're attracted to. Earlier in life, and if you choose somebody who's negatively expressed, Mars in Aries does have a tendency to get a little bit more aggressive. Yeah, and I don't like that. I don't like that for you. Because you have so much Venus in your chart. You have so much of that lovely sweetness. I would hate for it to be soured by a relationship experience. So we need to watch that. That's probably the biggest red flag of the chart, is that Mars in Aries. Although Mars is still in his sign of rulership, you know, if you are not aware or learn how to channel that fire appropriately, you can get burned by it. And you are here to really master the idea of relationships. So I think that it's in some ways karmically appropriate for you to put your biggest challenge in the house that you've decided to learn the most from. But I think that's also why you are so adamant about the rules of your house, is because when somebody breaks rules, and Capricorn loves a good rule, yeah, that's how you enforce boundaries. So it's kind of like a failsafe, really. No, I think that's pretty much about it. I think we've covered the gist of the chart. Your chart is really very simple, my dear, because you've stacked so much in the writing, teaching, speaking space, and connected that to your sixth house of work. The stubborn, excuse me, goodness, the stubbornness in your fourth house of family being rubbed off on you, conditioning your mind, that conditioning potentially needing to be broken, but also being very protective of your personal development, and then your relationship stuff and needing to work on that, and also needing to temper that fire if need be, as probably the most iffy part of your chart. I think that's pretty much about it. Cool. That, as they say, is that, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, good, Deidre. I'm so glad that you were able to watch the Pisces video. But that is going to be it for the live stream this morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. It's been a pleasure to read your charts as always. If you or somebody that you know, like, and trust who would also enjoy their chart being read, feel free to private message me birth date, birthplace, exact birth time. I will add you to the list, and we will get you going. And I will message you when your chart is featured. If you would like to go a little bit deeper and go one-on-one with your chart, we can always schedule a formal consultation. Just go to my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com, click on the consultations page. You'll see my price list. You'll see the consultation request form, as well as I have online classes that you can learn astrology from as well. And yeah, until next time, we'll tune back in on Monday for the next round of the Astro-Babble, and may the stars be ever in your favor.